What's up, internet? Robert Teegarden back again with another episode in my How to Edit for Beginner tutorial series. Changed the lighting, but same old me, kind of flipped the script a little bit to see how you guys would like it, to see if I would like it. I don't know, I mean, just trying to see how this motherfucker looks when I change things up. So today we are talking about multicam sequences inside of Premiere Pro. So what's the scenario? The scenario is you've gone through post, you've set up a camera or 2 or 7, or you're doing what I'm doing right now where you're recording your screen and you've got audio being captured on multiple devices, and you need a way of editing both of those streams, both cameras or the screen itself, in a fluid way. Before I figured this technique out, what I would do is I just layer these things on top of one another, V1, V2, V3, and I'd literally cut myself around each individual camera that I wanted to show. I would use this in weddings, I'd use this in interviews, I would use this in tutorials, and this technique just took a ton of time and it made me dread having multiple camera angles. And so I'd always try to find some lame excuse as to why I didn't really want to be using them in the first place. But as we all know, if we've done it, multiple camera angles adds just such a dynamic, versatile range in terms of the stories that we can tell. So it's much better to be able to use that stuff if you can afford to do it and if you have the knowledge on how to do these things in post. So this technique is actually pretty simple. As long as we follow a couple different steps, we're going to be a-okay. And so what we're going to do, we're going to hop on into the computer. I'm going to show you guys my technique. I've already got a situation set up where my footage has been synced up together. I've used my pluralize thing that I keep talking about. And so all the footage has been sunk together. And now all I need to do is to create this multicam sequence so that I can start punching back and forth between camera angles. So I'm going to show you how to do that. And I'm going to give you a couple tips on how I look at my edits and the way I switch cameras to make the most fluid and easy experience possible for the viewer. Not for me, for the viewer. All right. Let's jump on into my, I did it again. I keep saying this jump on in thing. All these people saying it and it gets in your head and you're like, I'm never gonna say it, but then you end up saying it. Premiere Pro environment, and I'm trying out a new screen share software as well, so hopefully this thing will work out. But like I said, I've got both of my camera streams here. You can tell I've got this one angle that's kind of off to the side. It's an 85mm prime that's on just the face, and then I've got a full body angle here for my subject where I get to see a lot more of the environment itself. And so my idea is that I'd be switching back and forth between these two camera angles. Now what I've done is I've actually color corrected my footage as I set it up. So I brought in my stuff, I synced all the footage together. I sunk. Do you sync footage? You sync footage, but I sunk my footage. I've already synced my footage. And so then I went and added my color grading, did my color correction, added color grading to this shot. It's not very complicated, very, my natural environment is what I wanted this thing to look at. So, so I do that already, and then I go in and I kind of render that timeline out. And so now what you're seeing are these two different cameras that have been sunk together. And now I have the perfect setup for me to set up a multicam sequence, okay? And so now, like I said, it's actually not that difficult. There's a few ways of doing it. You can go up to sequence, you can create new and do all these different things, but I've never found that to be the way that I like to do it. And so this one is called Defense Club A731 Synced. That's the appendage that Pluralize gives us after it's done its job. And so that sequence is living here in my timeline. So the easiest, fastest way to set up a multicam sequence is all I have to do is just right click on this sequence and go new sequence from clip. Now I know that seems a little misleading because I'm not using a clip in and of itself. I'm actually creating a brand new sequence from a sequence, but that's the option that it gives us here. So if I click on this, now it creates a brand new sequence and starts everything from the beginning. Now, what I would do here is now I have this duplicate sequence that is kind of smashed down here, and I have two things to do before I can proceed with what I need to do. The first thing is that I have to rename this sequence, right? I have a duplicate sequence up here that says one synced, and that's not going to be very easy to deal with when I go into post and I need to kind of float back and forth between these two sequences. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna rename this, and then I'm just gonna go back and delete the sync, and for simplicity's sake, I'm just gonna put MC for multi-channel. What I also do from time to time is I'll duplicate this sequence here, and I will put multicam instead of copy, multicam stringer. And so if you've seen my timeline video before, you'll know why I do these stringer sequences as well, where I leave everything untouched on a timeline so I can go back to it later if I need to pull a piece of footage. I've actually already worked this sequence through. I'm going back in just for the demo purpose to show you guys what I did, but I've already worked this thing through, and I had to go back into my stringer sequence and pull out one or two different things that I accidentally deleted. So it definitely comes in handy. I'm not just giving you this for, you know, education's sake. I use that technique all the time, and it's really handy. So I'm gonna go in here and I'm gonna double click on my multicam sequence. The next thing I have to do now that I've renamed my sequence appropriately so I can find it easier later on in my bins is I have to create a multicam sequence. I need to now make this thing a multicam enabled, because all I've done is just duplicated that sequence and it smashes it down and makes it green like Kermit the Frog for some stupid ass reason. So now what I want to do is I'm going to right click on the flattened sequence itself, and I'm going to go up to multicam, and I'm just going to click on enable. And now if you see, the camera view switched pretty quickly. And so what I have over here, here's the main camera view that I have. And now if you see this little icon right here, toggle multicam view, and the quick key for that is Shift-0. What it will do is it's going to open up a dialog window that's going to show me every camera that I have in that multicam sequence. So if I click that button right here, and if you don't have that button, here's a way to do it. You go to the plus sign right here, the button editor, and you open that and you'll see this thing right here, the toggle multicam view. You grab that and drag it into this window below, right? That little blue box window that you see. Now I already have it in there, so I'm just gonna click cancel, but that's how you get any of those buttons onto the preview window right there. And so now once I click that window, you'll see, I'll do it again. It pops each individual camera angle that I have in my setup sequence now on this multicam view. And what's amazing about multicam sequences is that I can watch my footage through. Let's see if I can find a good spot. I can watch my footage through, and simply by clicking 1, 2, 3, or 4 on my timeline, the amount of cameras that I have, I can instantly switch between each camera angle. Ridiculously cool workflow. So I'm gonna play this through and show you what I can do. I'm gonna hit watch it through.
Hi guys, welcome. My name is Morgan Stewart.
Click
Super
number 2.
You're here. My hope
now it's automatically switched onto that.
Training. This has everything that I wish that I had when I was a player.
Click back again.
It's got mental. It's got physical. It's
Click
got
back
even
again.
some coaching.
Okay, now here's the other thing to look at. I'm going to make my sequence much bigger on the visual side. But remember, I started right here. Hi guys. Right? And then as I was walking through, I started calling stuff out, and it automatically made these cuts and camera transitions for me as I was working the footage through. So it's pretty helpful, because like I said, used to what I'd have to do is I'd go back into my synced setup, and as I'm watching these through, I'd hit the C on my keyboard, and I'd be cutting up these individual pieces and laying them on top. It's really just an awful way of doing it. It's so time consuming. So I would go back, and it's already made these pre-cuts onto my timeline, which is really unbelievable. Now here's one of the hacks that I use all of the time. Before I get into my theory on where I make my cuts, I'm gonna show you that if I make a mistake, I can hit N on my keyboard, and it gives me the nudge tool or rolling edit tool. And I can simply just grab this footage right here and move the camera cut back and forth based off of where I want it to be. Okay, now I just haphazardly made these cuts and didn't make it anything that was significant. I was just illustrating the fact that I can switch between camera angles. and show you how well it makes those cuts and showcases the ability of the workflow. But if I was actually going to make this on any real significant way, I would be kind of moving things around based off of the audio. Okay. So now what I've done is I have my multicam sequence here. I've showed you that I've made these cuts and how easy it is to switch from one camera to the other. We've also gone over how I can enable multi-camera view at the same time. That is fairly resource intensive for your machine to do. So you'll notice I've actually dropped my quality down to about half, and I've also enabled a proxy workflow. I've done another video about proxy workflows as well that you can check out in order to make my dual stream 4K footage faster and kind of just running in real time. So now that I've done that, I'll go through some of the theories that I've used in order to make my cuts and how I switch cameras back and forth. I don't just switch them without any theory. There's definitely an art to be able to switch cameras back and forth. And the first thing that I do is I rely on the blink. There is an amazing book, In the Blink of an Eye by Walter Murch, that talks about this theory, and really it's kind of stemming from the fact that in natural state of conversation, when I'm finished with a thought or I'm ready to switch to a different point of my thought, I naturally take a blink when I'm almost done. I just blanked like 50 times right there just thinking about it so consciously. So my first theory is that I use the blink to switch my cameras back and forth. So this would be a perfect time right where my cursor just happens to be, that if I wanted to switch cameras right before the blink is a good time to do it. So let's just actually nudge this back to our second camera. We'll see if that plays through and actually makes any sense. I'm gonna disable this.
This has everything that I wish that I had when I was a player growing up. It's got mental, it's got physical.
So now that's not the perfect place. I actually would probably go with it's got mental. Let's see if there's.
I had when I was a player growing up. It's got mental that I wish that I had when I was a player growing up.
So we see growing up, and she's gonna change, right? And so I'll change this back to right just before the blink.
That I had when I was a player growing up. It's got mental. It's that I had when I was a player growing up.
So we're not distracted by that camera change because we subconsciously perceive the blink as something that is okay. We internalize the blink. And so I can make that edit point there. That's one way that I make that, is always on the blink. The other one that I'll focus on is where the breath is being taken, or if I make an So in the actual course of conversation, sometimes depending on the production, I'll be instructed to take out all of the ums or all of the breaths. That's very awkward. It's not a normal flow of conversation. Even very polished people and speakers have the ability to say When we say in a natural course of dialogue, what we're actually doing is maintaining the attention. We're maintaining possession of the conversation by saying because we're not giving somebody the chance to interject when we're talking, because occupies the dead space. So I found a great place where there's an that I can use as a springboard into a camera change. And so the maintains my attention on the thought that he's having, but I can use that brief gap to switch that camera angle without it being something that is overly noticed, right? So we'll take a look at what I'm talking about here.
We live in a world where we are one of the only beings.
So it's a great place to be able to make that cut, is just after the right before he starts to say something different, right? Because the thought is continuing, but I can switch the camera angle because there's a brief kind of reprieve, a rest in between what's going on in that regard. The last theory that I'll use is cutting on a situation in which I need to bring attention to what that individual is saying. You start to find these cues that look more natural, and these subtle tricks that we play in terms of our subconscious of what's holding our attention. Or the opposite of that is that I'm making the cut to drive your attention into the change that I'm doing. So it's something that's important, something of prominence, something that changes within the story that I think is important for you to see as the editor. Again, as editors, we're kind of the last final rewrite of the script in terms of what we have going on here. So it's our responsibility to tell that story in the most impactful way possible. Sometimes that's keeping the flow of the conversation going and the attention of the viewer, but oftentimes it's our job to switch the attention and jar the audience for something that's important that we want them to see, which I think is really is a fun task to be able to have. It's a lot of power. So there you have it. This one's pretty simple. Setting up a multicam sequence is as easy as a couple of clicks. Making sure that you manage your sequences inside your project bin is really crucial, because I've definitely gotten into situations where I didn't do that and subsequently learned from it, because you get sequences that are named the same thing and you're making edits onto one that you don't necessarily want to do. So make sure that you find a way of managing your sequences in a very appropriate way. You can go back and kind of watch the video that we have on that one in the series as well. We talked about how and when you should be making your cuts, focusing on the breath, focusing on blinking, and taking advantage of ums. Also using the technique of jarring your audience with a camera switch that makes sense for the story, that's important for the story. And so that's it, ladies and germs. That's all we have for this one here on multicam sequences here on the Teegarden tutorial series. We already talked about, we don't do the, like, you know, whatever, but we're trying to build it. If you think it's cool, give it a thumbs up. That would be super helpful. But until next week, this is Robert Teegarden signing off. We'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you so much for watching.